The winter wind howled across the Nevada desert like a wounded animal, carrying with it a veil of dust and grit that stung the eyes and scraped the throat. Clara Whitmore stood at the window of her weathered cabin, watching the storm approach with the weary resignation of one who had endured many such tempests. The glass panes, warped with age and heat, rattled in their frames as if trying to escape the fury building outside. She was 27 years old, though the harsh desert sun had etched fine lines around her eyes that made her appear older. Her auburn hair, once the pride of her youth, was now pulled back in a severe bun, practical against the constant wind. 3 years had passed since Thomas died in the mine collapse. 3 years of fighting to keep this patch of scorched earth that his parents had left them. 3 years of being the widow Whitmore, the peculiar woman who refused to sell, refused to remarry, refused to bend. The storm struck with sudden violence. Lightning split the sky in jagged white veins, illuminating the barren landscape in stark, momentary clarity. Thunder followed, shaking the cabin to its foundation. Clara moved away from the window, her boots echoing on the worn wooden floors. She needed to check on the horses, Buttermilk and Cole, her only companions in this desolate place. Wrapping herself in Thomas's old oilcloth coat, she pushed open the door. The wind nearly tore it from her hands, sand and debris swirling in a blinding dance. She fought her way to the stable, her skirts whipping around her legs like angry serpents. The horses were restless, their eyes rolling white with fear as they stamped and snorted in their stalls. "Easy now," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the storm. She ran a calming hand along Buttermilk's neck, feeling the mare's muscles quiver beneath her palm. It was then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A groan, human and pained, coming from somewhere near the back of the stable. Clara froze. Living alone had taught her caution. The desert attracted all manner of desperate men. She reached for the shotgun she kept mounted on the stable wall, her fingers closing around the familiar weight of the stock. Moving slowly, she edged toward the sound, weapon raised. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief illumination, she saw him. A man lay crumpled against the hay bales, his dark coat torn and dusty. Blood seeped through his shirt at the ribs, staining the yellow straw beneath him. His face was obscured by several days' growth of beard, his hair matted with sweat and dirt. A leather holster hung empty at his hip. Clara kept the shotgun trained on him as she approached. The man's eyes fluttered open, gray as the storm clouds above, sharp even in pain. He tried to speak, but only managed a rasping cough. "Don't move," Clara commanded, though it was clear he was in no condition to pose a threat. She studied him in the intermittent lightning flashes. His clothes, despite their current state, were well made. His boots were quality leather, not the rough hide of a common drifter. But it was his hands that caught her attention, calloused and scarred like a laborer's, yet somehow refined in their shape and movement. "Please," he finally managed, his voice cultured despite its weakness. "Just shelter. One night." Clara's jaw tightened. She'd heard tales of women who'd shown kindness to strangers, only to pay dearly for their charity, but the blood was spreading, dark and ominous. And something in those gray eyes, a weariness that went beyond physical pain, stirred an unwelcome sympathy. "What's your name?" she demanded. "Sam," he whispered. "Just Sam. No surname, no explanation." Clara knew better than to trust a man who wouldn't give his full name. But the storm was worsening, and leaving him here would mean certain death. She made her decision with the same grim practicality that had kept her alive these 3 years. "Can you walk?" He nodded, though the effort clearly cost him. Clara slung his arm over her shoulders, staggering under his weight. He was taller than she'd realized, broad-shouldered beneath the torn coat. Together they stumbled through the raging storm toward the cabin, Clara bearing most of his weight as his boots dragged furrows in the sand. Inside, she deposited him on the floor near the stove, not willing to sacrifice her bed to a stranger. He slumped against the wall, breathing heavily. In the lamplight, she could see him more clearly. Mid-30s, she guessed. with premature silver threading through his dark hair. His features were strong, almost aristocratic beneath the dirt and stubble, but marked by something hard and bitter around the mouth. "I need to see that wound," she said, her tone brooking no argument. He nodded, fumbling with his shirt buttons. Clara helped him shrug out of the coat and shirt, trying not to notice the lean muscle beneath. The wound was a deep gash along his ribs, not a bullet wound, she noted with some relief, but perhaps from a knife or a fall against something sharp. It was ugly, but not fatal if properly tended. She fetched her medical supplies, rudimentary but adequate, and set about cleaning the wound. Sam hissed through his teeth but remained still, his eyes fixed on some point beyond her shoulder. As she worked, Clara noticed more scars on his torso, old and white against his sun-darkened skin. Whatever this man's story, it hadn't been an easy one. "You running from the law?" she asked bluntly as she threaded a needle for stitching. "No." His answer was immediate and firm. "From something worse than the law." Clara didn't press. In the desert, everyone was running from something. She stitched in silence, her hands steady despite the stranger's proximity. When she finished, she bound the wound with clean strips of cloth and helped him back into his torn shirt. "There's a loft," she said, gesturing to the ladder in the corner. "You can sleep there tonight. Come morning, you move on." "I'm grateful," Sam said, his gray eyes meeting hers directly. "I'll cause you no trouble." Clara doubted that. In her experience, trouble had a way of following men like him, men with cultured voices and calloused hands, with expensive boots and empty holsters. But she'd made her choice. She helped him to the ladder, watching as he climbed painfully to the loft. "There's a blanket up there," she called. "Don't come down until I call you in the morning." She heard him settle above, the boards creaking under his weight. Clara barred the door and checked her shotgun before retiring to her own bed in the curtained alcove. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the storm and the stranger's breathing above. Every sound made her tense, her hand reaching reflexively for the pistol she kept beneath her pillow. Who was this Sam? The way he'd held himself despite the pain, the educated accent, the quality of his clothes. He was no ordinary drifter. And what could be worse than the law that would send a man fleeing into a desert storm? Clara had lived long enough in this unforgiving land to know that secrets had a way of surfacing, usually bringing destruction in their wake. But as the storm gradually spent itself and the cabin settled into an uneasy quiet, she found herself thinking not of the danger, but of the moment their eyes had met. There had been something there, beneath the pain and wariness, a recognition, perhaps, of one wounded soul encountering another. It was a foolish thought, and Clara pushed it away. She'd learned the hard way that the desert was no place for foolish thoughts. Still, as sleep finally claimed her, she couldn't quite forget the weight of him against her as they'd struggled through the storm, or the way he'd whispered grateful like a man who'd forgotten the meaning of kindness. Tomorrow, she told herself firmly. Tomorrow he would leave, and her life would return to its careful, solitary rhythm. But somewhere deep in her bones, Clara Whitmore knew that nothing would be the same come morning. The storm had brought more than wind and sand to her door. It had brought change, dangerous and inevitable as the lightning that still flickered on the horizon. And despite every hard-learned lesson about survival in this merciless land, she found herself not entirely sorry for it. The stranger shifted in the loft above, a soft groan escaping him. Clara turned on her side, pulling the thin blanket up to her chin. One night, she reminded herself. Just one night, but even as the thought formed, she knew it for the lie it was. Some storms, once let in, could never truly be shut out again. Clara woke before dawn, as was her habit. For a moment, she'd forgotten about the stranger in her loft, but the unfamiliar creak of boards above reminded her sharply of his presence. She dressed quickly and quietly, then stepped outside to assess the storm's damage. The desert looked scoured clean, with new drifts of sand piled against the cabin walls and fence posts leaning at drunken angles. When she returned inside, Sam was already descending the ladder, moving stiffly but with better color in his face than the night before. In daylight, cleaned of the worst dirt and blood. He was a striking figure, tall and lean, with an unconscious authority in his bearing that seemed at odds with his current circumstances. "I should go," he said without preamble. Clara studied him coolly. "You won't make it 5 miles in your condition. That wound needs at least a week to heal properly." "I've imposed enough." "Can you work?" she interrupted. When he nodded, she continued. "Then you'll earn your keep. The storm damaged the fence, and I need to move the cattle away from the alkali springs before they poison themselves. You help me with that, and you can stay until you're healed." Something flickered in his gray eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or gratitude. "I know cattle," he said simply. Over the following days, Clara discovered that Sam knew a great deal more than cattle. He could mend fences with an efficiency that spoke of experience, handle a hammer with the ease of one who'd done manual labor. Yet he approached each task with a tactical precision that suggested military training. He spoke little, but when he did, his observations were sharp and practical. He repaired her fence posts using a technique she'd never seen before, bracing them against the desert winds in a way that would hold far longer than her previous attempts. When they drove the small herd of cattle away from the poisoned springs, he seemed to know instinctively how to position himself, how to guide the stubborn beasts without exhausting horse or rider. "You've done this before," Clara observed on the 3rd day, as they watched the cattle settle near the safe water source. "A long time ago," Sam replied, his eyes distant. "Another life." She didn't press. In turn, he didn't ask about the single grave marked with a wooden cross behind the cabin, or why a woman chose to live alone in this desolate place. They worked in companionable silence. Two people who understood the weight of unspoken histories, but silence could only hold so much. In the evenings, as they shared simple meals of beans and cornbread, conversation crept in like water finding cracks in stone. Sam would ask about the land, the seasons, the habits of the local wildlife. Safe topics. Clara found herself responding more than she'd intended, even laughing once when he described a particularly stubborn bull's creative attempts to avoid being herded. "You're not what I expected," she said one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "What did you expect?" He leaned against the railing, careful of his healing ribs. "A rougher man. Most drifters who pass through here can barely string 2 words together, let alone know the proper way to shore up a fence against wind damage." Sam's smile was rueful. "Education doesn't always match occupation out here." "No," Clara agreed softly. "It doesn't." The moment stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. A herd of pronghorn antelope appeared on the distant ridge, moving in graceful silhouette against the dying light. They watched in shared silence until the animals disappeared over the hill. "My husband loved this time of day," Clara said suddenly, surprising herself. She rarely spoke of Thomas to anyone. "He used to say the desert showed its true face at sunset. All the harshness softened, all the beauty revealed." He was right, Sam said quietly. About the desert, at least. Clara glanced at him, noting the way the fading light caught the silver threads in his hair, the deep lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into too many suns. "You've spent time in places like this before. Different deserts. Same emptiness." He paused. "Same beauty, too, if you know how to look for it." Their eyes met and held for a moment before Clara looked away, unsettled by the warmth that bloomed in her chest. She stood abruptly. "I should check on the horses." But Sam was already learning her routines, her deflections. Over the next days, he seemed to sense when she needed space and when she needed presence. He would work alongside her in comfortable quiet, then surprise her with an unexpected observation or dry comment that drew reluctant smiles. The second week brought new challenges. The well pump, always temperamental, finally gave up entirely. Clara stood over it, frustrated and calculating how far she'd have to travel for replacement parts she couldn't afford. "Let me look," Sam offered. She watched, skeptical, as he examined the mechanism. Within an hour, He'd diagnosed the problem and fashioned a temporary fix using parts scavenged from old equipment in the barn. The pump wheezed back to life, drawing clear water from the depths. "How?" Clara asked, genuinely amazed. "I've worked with machinery." Again, that careful vagueness about his past. But his eyes lit up as he explained the mechanics. And Clara found herself drawn to his enthusiasm, the way his hands moved expressively as he talked about pressure and valves and flow rates. That night, she made coffee, real coffee, from her precious store, and they sat on the porch as stars emerged in the clear desert sky. The intimacy of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. 2 weeks ago, they'd been strangers. Now, the space between them on the bench seemed to hum with possibility. "I should move on soon," Sam said, breaking the spell. "I've stayed too long already. Your ribs aren't fully healed. They're healed enough." Clara set down her cup carefully. "Are you so eager to leave?" He turned to her, and in the lamplight spilling from the window, she could see conflict written across his features. "Eager? No, but staying. It's not fair to you. The longer I remain, the more danger I might bring to your door. I've faced danger before. Not like this." His voice was harsh with self-recrimination. "You don't know who I am. What I've done. I know enough." Clara interrupted. "I know you work hard. I know you treat my animals with kindness. I know you fix things around here I'd given up on. I know you're running from something that haunts you. Well, Samuel, whatever your name is, we're all running from something out here." He stared at her, something raw and vulnerable flickering across his face. "Clara, stay until you're truly healed," she said firmly. "That's all I'm asking." The moment stretched taut between them, filled with everything they weren't saying. Finally, Sam nodded once, a gesture that felt heavier than simple agreement. Later that night, Clara lay awake thinking about the way he'd said her name, soft and careful like something that might break. She thought about his hands, scarred but gentle as they'd worked the pump mechanism. She thought about the weight of loneliness she'd carried for 3 years, and how it seemed lighter when he was near. It was dangerous, this warming she felt toward him. Every practical bone in her body warned against it. He was a stranger still, carrying secrets that could destroy the careful life she'd built. But when morning came and she found him already up, feeding the horses and humming softly under his breath, she couldn't bring herself to regret allowing him to stay. They fell into a routine over the following days. Sam took on more of the heavy work without being asked, seeming to understand instinctively what needed doing. Clara found herself cooking with more care, using spices she'd been hoarding, taking pleasure in his appreciation of a well-made meal. One evening, a desert thunderstorm rolled through, not as violent as the night they'd met, but fierce enough to drive them inside. They sat by the stove, Clara mending clothes while Sam cleaned and oiled the various tools he'd been using. The domestic intimacy of the scene struck them both, though neither commented on it. "You never asked about my husband," Clara said suddenly. "Most people do." Sam looked up from the hammer he was working on. "Figured you'd tell me if you wanted me to know." "He died in a mine collapse. The Bonanza shaft, owned by the Transcontinental Railroad Company. They said it was an accident, but the miners had been complaining about the supports for weeks." Her voice turned bitter. "The company paid nothing? Said it was an act of God." Sam's hands had gone very still. When Clara looked at him, his face seemed carved from stone. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. I'm sorry." There was something in his voice, a weight that went beyond simple sympathy. Clara studied him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way he wouldn't meet her eyes. A suspicion, vague and troubling, began to form in her mind. But before she could pursue it, he rose abruptly. "I should check the livestock," he said, reaching for his coat. "In this storm?" "I won't be long." He was out the door before she could protest further, leaving Clara alone with her thoughts and a growing certainty that Sam's secrets were deeper and more troubling than she'd imagined. When he returned an hour later, soaked and shivering, She handed him a towel without comment. They didn't speak of the mine or her husband again that night, but something had shifted between them. The careful walls they'd maintained were beginning to crack, and Clara wasn't sure if what lay beyond would be salvation or disaster. The day started with deceptive calm. Clara had sent Sam to town for supplies, a test of sorts, to see if he would return. She'd given him money and a list, watched him saddle Cole with practiced ease, noticed how he checked the rifle before securing it to the saddle. Old habits, she thought, of a man used to watching his back. While he was gone, 3 riders appeared on the horizon. Clara recognized them immediately. Frank Morrison, the mayor's brother, and 2 of his hired thugs. She met them at the porch, shotgun cradled casually in her arms. "Mrs. Whitmore." Morrison touched his hat with mock courtesy. "Come to discuss your tax situation." "Nothing to discuss. I paid what I owe." "Well now, seems there's been some reassessment. What with property values rising and all?" His smile was cold as a snake's. "You're behind by quite a sum." Clara knew this game. They'd been trying to force her out for 2 years, ever since they discovered the railroad might be interested in running a spur line through her property. "Show me the papers." "Don't need papers to collect what's owed." Morrison's hand drifted toward his gun. "Though we could work out an arrangement, you being a widow and all. Alone out here?" The implication in his voice made Clara's skin crawl, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'll need to see official documentation from the county assessor." Morrison's face darkened. "You got 1 week to come up with $500, or we'll be back to collect in other ways." They wheeled their horses around, kicking up dust as they galloped away. Clara remained on the porch until they were specks on the horizon, then sank onto the bench, shotgun across her knees. $500. It might as well have been 5,000. Sam returned at sunset, the wagon loaded with supplies. He took one look at her face and knew something had happened. Clara told him about Morrison's visit, watching his expression harden with each word. "They have no legal right," he said quietly. "It's extortion. Legal doesn't matter much out here." Clara began unloading the wagon, needing the physical activity. Morrison has the mayor's ear and the sheriff's gun. That's all the legal he needs. Sam grabbed a crate, lifting it easily despite his healing ribs. "You could fight it." "With what? A widow's word against the town establishment?" She laughed bitterly. "I've got about $40 saved. That won't even buy me a lawyer's time." They worked in tense silence, storing the supplies as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. The air grew heavy and electric, pressing down like a physical weight. By the time they finished, the first fat drops of rain were falling. "We should get inside," Clara said, but Sam was staring at the approaching storm with an odd expression. "I've brought trouble to you," he said. "Morrison wouldn't have moved so boldly if you were still alone. They see a man here. They think you're protected. So they push harder to test the boundaries." "That's not—" Clara began. But thunder cracked overhead, and suddenly the skies opened. Rain fell in sheets, instantly soaking them both. They ran for the cabin, Sam catching Clara's arm when she slipped in the sudden mud. Inside, they stood dripping on the floor, breathing hard. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees with the storm, and Clara shivered in her soaked dress. Sam moved to add wood to the stove, his own clothes plastered to his frame. "You'll catch your death," he said. "You need to get into dry things." Clara nodded but found herself unable to move. The lamplight flickered as the wind howled outside, and suddenly the cabin felt impossibly small, the space between them charged with more than storm energy. Sam turned from the stove and saw her still standing there, arms wrapped around herself. "Clara," just her name, but the way he said it held volumes. She took a step toward him, then another. His eyes never left hers as she approached, dark with something that made her heart race. When she was close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, she stopped. "I'm not sorry you're here," she whispered. His hand came up slowly, carefully, to cup her cheek. His thumb brushed away a drop of rain, the touch sending sparks through her skin. You should be. You should send me away. I know. She covered his hand with hers, holding it against her face. But I won't. For a long moment, they stood frozen, balanced on a precipice. Then Sam lowered his head, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his lips found hers, gentle at first, almost hesitant. Clara made a soft sound and pressed closer, and gentleness gave way to 3 years of loneliness, weeks of growing attraction, and the urgency of two people who'd forgotten what it meant to be touched with tenderness. The kiss deepened, Sam's arms coming around her, pulling her against him. Clara's hands fisted in his wet shirt, anchoring herself as the world spun. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing raggedly. "Clara," he said again, his voice rough. "I can't. There are things you don't know. I don't care." She was shivering now, from cold and reaction. "Not tonight. Tomorrow you can tell me your secrets, and I'll tell you mine. But tonight, please, Sam, I'm so tired of being alone." Something broke in his expression then, a wall crumbling. He kissed her again, fiercer this time, walking her backward until her back met the cabin wall. His hands tangled in her wet hair, pins scattering across the floor. Clara gasped against his mouth, overwhelmed by sensation after so long without touch. When he pulled back, his eyes searched hers. "Are you certain?" Instead of answering, she took his hand and led him to the curtained alcove where her bed lay. The rain hammered against the roof as she turned to face him, reaching for the buttons of her dress with trembling fingers. Sam caught her hands, stilling them. "Let me," he murmured, with infinite care. He helped her out of the wet dress, his touch reverent despite the hunger in his eyes. Clara had expected to feel shy, vulnerable. Instead, she felt powerful, seeing how her bare skin affected him, how his hands shook slightly as they skimmed her shoulders. She reached for his shirt in turn, carefully avoiding his bandaged ribs as she pushed the wet fabric away. The scars she'd glimpsed before were silver in the lamplight, mapping a history of violence across his chest. She traced one with her fingertip, and he shuddered. "So much pain," she whispered. He caught her hand, pressing it flat against his heart. "Not tonight. Tonight there's only this." They came together slowly, carefully, mindful of his injury and her long absence from such intimacy. Sam was patient, gentle, coaxing responses from her body she'd forgotten were possible. When Clara gasped and arched beneath him, he whispered endearments against her skin, words that might have been promises or prayers. Afterward, they lay entwined, listening to the storm rage outside. Clara's head rested on Sam's shoulder, her hand over the steady beat of his heart. She felt transformed, as if the desert had finally released its hold on her, allowing her to bloom like the rare flowers that appeared after rain. "I should go back to the loft," Sam said eventually, though he made no move to leave. "No." Clara tightened her arm around him. "Stay, just for tonight." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "Just for tonight," he agreed, though they both knew it for a lie. There was no going back now, no pretending they were merely stranger and hostess. The storm had washed away their careful boundaries, leaving only truth in its wake. As the rain continued to fall, Sam told her fragments of his past, not the whole truth. Not yet, but enough. He spoke of building things, of seeing his visions made real in iron and steel. He talked about betrayal, about losing everything he'd built, about running until he'd forgotten what he was running toward. Clara shared her own stories. Her marriage to Thomas, young and hopeful, their dreams of children and prosperity, the slow death of those dreams in the hard reality of desert life, the mind collapse that took him, leaving her with nothing but debt and determination. "You're the strongest woman I've known," Sam said quietly. Clara laughed softly. "I'm not strong. I'm just too stubborn to quit." "Same thing, perhaps." They talked until their voices grew drowsy, until the storm began to subside, just before dawn. Clara woke to find Sam watching her, his expression unguarded in the gray light. "What is it?" she asked. "Trying to memorize this moment," he said. "For when She silenced him with a kiss. "No talk of leaving? Not yet. We'll face what comes when it comes." But even as she said it, Clara could feel the weight of tomorrow pressing in. Morrison would be back. Sam's past, whatever it was, would catch up to them. The desert would demand its due, as it always did. For now, though, there was this, the warmth of skin against skin, the steady rhythm of shared breathing, the peace that came from being truly known by another person. Clara closed her eyes and held tight to the man beside her, storing up sweetness against the bitter days she knew must come. The rain had stopped. Soon the sun would rise, harsh and revealing, burning away the softness of night, but not yet, not yet. The morning after the storm dawned clear and merciless, as if the desert sought to burn away any softness the rain had brought. Sam woke early, as was his habit, but for the first time in years, he was reluctant to leave the warmth beside him. Clara slept on, her face peaceful in the pale light, one hand curled against his chest. He knew he should go. Every instinct honed by months of running screamed at him to gather his few belongings and disappear before the town woke, before anyone could connect the drifter at the Whitmore place with Samuel Ashcroft, the railroad baron whose name was spoken in boardrooms and brothels alike. But when he tried to ease away, Clara murmured in her sleep and moved closer, and his resolve crumbled like sand. By the time she woke, he'd made coffee and was standing at the window, watching the road. The set of his shoulders told her everything. "You're leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. He turned, his face carefully composed. "It's time. Past time." Clara rose and wrapped herself in a shawl, moving to stand beside him. The morning sun caught the red in her hair, turning it to flame. Because of last night, because of everything. His hands gripped the window frame. "Clara, I've been selfish. Every day I stay puts you in more danger. From Morrison, I told you. Not just Morrison." Sam faced her fully then, and she saw the weight he'd been carrying all along. "There are men looking for me, powerful men with long reaches and longer memories. When they find me, and they will, anyone near me will be considered an enemy." Clara lifted her chin, that stubborn tilt he'd come to know so well. "Then tell me why. Tell me what you're running from. Let me decide what danger I'm willing to face." He wanted to refuse, to keep his secrets buried. But after last night, after what they'd shared, he owed her truth. "Very well, but you won't like what you hear." They sat at the kitchen table, the morning light harsh between them. Sam spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. "My name is Samuel Ashcroft. I am one of the principal shareholders of the Transcontinental Railroad Company." Clara's face went very still. He continued before she could speak. "I started as an engineer, working my way up from laying track to designing routes. I believed we were building something grand, something that would unite the country and bring prosperity to places like this." His laugh was bitter. "I was a fool. Once I had power. I discovered what that power was built on. Corners cut, safety ignored, men's lives weighed against profit margins." "The Bonanza mine," Clara whispered. "Among others, I fought against it, tried to implement safety standards, but I was outvoted, outmaneuvered. They used my own signature on documents I'd never properly read." Sam's hands clenched on the table. "When I tried to expose the corruption, they came for me. Not legally, that would have been too public. They sent hired killers. I've been running for 6 months." Clara sat in silence, processing this. The man she'd taken to her bed was partly responsible for her husband's death. The irony was as sharp as a blade. "You knew," she said finally. "When I told you about Thomas, you knew." "Yes, and you said nothing." "What could I say? That I was sorry? That I'd tried to prevent it? Words are worthless against that kind of loss." Clara stood abruptly, needing distance. She paced to the stove, then back, her emotions in turmoil. "You should have told me immediately. Would you have let me stay?" "No," she admitted. Then, more quietly, "But that would have been my choice to make. The sound of horses interrupted whatever Sam might have said. 3 riders were approaching fast. Clara recognized the lead horse, a stallion named Lucifer that belonged to Josiah Crane, a merchant from town. "Get out of sight," she hissed, but Sam was already moving, retrieving the rifle from beside the door. "No hiding," he said grimly. "Not anymore." The riders pulled up in a cloud of dust. Josiah Crane dismounted, his expensive suit incongruous in the desert setting. He was a small, neat man with cold eyes and soft hands that had never known hard work. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, tipping his hat. His gaze slid to Sam. "And you'd be the drifter she's been harboring." "Just a hired hand," Clara interjected. Crane smiled thinly. "Come now, Mrs. Whitmore. Did you really think news wouldn't travel? A stranger arrives just as Samuel Ashcroft goes missing, a man matching his description, with educated speech and engineer's knowledge." He studied Sam with satisfaction. "The resemblance is quite remarkable, even with the beard." Sam stepped forward, subtly placing himself between Crane and Clara. "What do you want?" "Direct. I appreciate that in a business associate." Crane adjusted his cuffs. "I represent certain interests that have been looking for you. Mr. Ashcroft, you've led us quite a chase. I have nothing to do with the railroad anymore." "Oh, but you do. You see, your shares, which you still legally own, are needed for a rather important vote. The expansion through Nevada requires unanimous board approval." Crane's smile widened. "Your former partners are willing to be generous. Return to San Francisco. Cast your vote, and you can disappear again with enough money to live comfortably wherever you choose. And if I refuse..." Crane's gaze shifted to Clara. "That would be unfortunate. Mrs. Whitmore here is already in a precarious position. Tax troubles, I hear, and living alone, so far from town. Accidents happen in the desert." The threat was clear. Sam's jaw tightened, but his voice remained level. "You'd harm an innocent woman." "Innocent?" Crane laughed. "She's been harboring a fugitive. That makes her complicit in the eyes of certain people. But we're reasonable men. You come quietly, and Mrs. Whitmore keeps her land, her life, her reputation. Refuse." He shrugged eloquently. "I need time to consider. You have until sunset. We'll be waiting in town." Crane remounted, then paused. "Oh, and a Mr. Ashcroft? Don't think of running again. We have men watching every road out of the territory." After they left, Clara and Sam stood in silence, the truth of his identity hanging between them like a wall. Finally, Clara spoke. "You have to go with them." Sam turned on her, incredulous. "After what they threatened, they'll make good on those threats whether you go or not. At least this way, you might have some leverage." She wouldn't meet his eyes. "And perhaps it's best. We both knew this couldn't last. Clara," he reached for her, but she stepped away. "Don't! Just don't!" Her voice was steady, but he could see the effort it cost her. "You lied to me, Sam, Samuel, whoever you are. You let me..." She stopped, unable to continue. "Let you what? Care for me? As if I had any control over that? As if I didn't fall just as hard, just as fast?" "You're part of the machine that killed my husband." "I know." The words were raw. "I'll carry that guilt forever. But I'm trying to make amends." "Amends?" Clara's composure finally cracked. "You think fixing my fence and warming my bed makes amends?" The words hit him like a physical blow. Sam stepped back, his face closing off. "No, nothing makes amends for that. I'll go with Crane." "Good." But as he turned to gather his few possessions, Clara's voice stopped him, small and broken. "Was any of it real? These weeks? Last night? Was any of it true?" Sam paused in the doorway of the loft. When he looked back, his carefully maintained control had shattered. "Every moment, every word I said in the dark, that was the truest I've been in years." He climbed to the loft before she could respond. Clara sank into a chair, her strength exhausted. Through the window, she could see vultures circling in the distance, patient as always. The desert would have its due. It always did. As Sam packed his meager belongings, he could hear Clara moving below, the ordinary sounds of morning chores carried out with mechanical precision. Each familiar sound was a knife twist, a reminder of what he was losing. Not just Clara, though that loss cut deepest, but this simple life where he'd remembered who he'd been before money and power corrupted everything he touched. He descended with his bundle, finding Clara standing rigid by the stove. "I'll saddle Cole," he said quietly. "Take buttermilk. She's faster. Clara, just go." Her voice was steady as granite. "Go back to your boardrooms and your votes. Go back to the life you chose. I never chose." He stopped. What was the point? She was right. Every decision, every compromise had been his choice. He'd told himself he was building something important, but in the end, he'd built nothing but misery. He paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I love you. That's the one clean thing in all of this mess." Clara's shoulders trembled, but she didn't turn. "Love isn't enough. It never has been in places like this." Sam left then, knowing if he stayed another moment, his resolve would crumble entirely. As he saddled Buttermilk, he allowed himself one last look at the cabin where he'd found something he hadn't even known he'd been searching for. Then he mounted and rode toward town, toward Crane and whatever judgment awaited, behind him. Clara stood at the window, watching until horse and rider disappeared into the shimmering heat. Only then did she allow herself to cry, harsh sobs that shook her entire frame. But even through her tears, her mind was working, planning. They thought they'd won. Crane and his ilk. They thought a desert widow had no power, no resources. They were wrong. And Samuel Ashcroft, her Sam, despite everything, would not face those wolves alone. The consequences came swiftly, like vultures that had been circling all along. Clara woke the morning after Sam's departure to find her horses dead in their stalls, foam at their mouths telling the tale of poisoning. Cole and Buttermilk, her faithful companions through years of hardship, gone. She knelt between them, her hands trembling as she closed their eyes, rage building in her chest like a desert storm. Morrison appeared an hour later with 6 men, their intentions clear in their swagger and smirks. "Shame about the horses," he said, not bothering to hide his satisfaction. "Alkali water, maybe. These springs can turn bad overnight. You know what you did," Clara said quietly, still kneeling by Cole's head. "Prove it." Morrison dismounted, walking closer. "Now then, about those taxes. Amount's gone up. Seems there's interest and penalties. You're looking at $800 now. The land's not worth that." "No. Well then, I suppose we'll have to seize it, unless—" He let the word hang, his meaning clear in the way his eyes traveled over her. Clara stood slowly, her back straight despite the grief and rage. "Get off my property." Morrison's face darkened. "You got 1 week, widow, then we come to collect one way or another." After they left, Clara walked to the small shed where she kept her tools. Her hands were steady now as she selected what she needed. If they wanted war, she'd give them one. 3 days later, Sheriff Randall himself rode out, accompanied by Morrison and Crane. They found Clara working on the fence, her dress dusty, her hair escaping its pins. She didn't acknowledge them until Randall cleared his throat. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm here on official business." Clara straightened, hammer still in hand. "State it then." Randall shifted uncomfortably. Unlike Morrison, he wasn't entirely corrupt, just weak. "There's been a complaint filed. Says you've been harboring a wanted man, Samuel Ashcroft. No law against hiring help. There is against aiding a fugitive." Crane spoke up, his neat appearance incongruous against the desert backdrop. "Mr. Ashcroft is wanted for questioning in several matters. He left days ago. You know that. We know he was here for weeks. That makes you an accessory." Crane smiled thinly. "Unless you cooperate." "Cooperate how?" "Sign your land over to Mr. Morrison here. In exchange, all charges will be dropped, and you'll receive enough money to start over somewhere else." Clara laughed, harsh and bitter. "Start over. This land is all I have left of my husband. Your husband, who died in Ashcroft's mine. Crane's voice was silk over steel. How fitting that you took his killer to your bed. The hammer was in her hand before thought formed. Only Randall's quick movement prevented her from throwing it. Enough, the sheriff said. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm ordering you to town for questioning. You can come peaceful-like, or I'll come. Clara set the hammer down carefully. Let me get my things. Inside the cabin, she moved quickly. Her father's old Navy Colt, hidden beneath loose floorboards, money sewn into her corset, a letter she'd written days ago, just in case. She paused at the bed, remembering Sam's weight beside her, his whispered promises in the dark. Then she hardened her heart and walked out. The ride to town was silent except for the horse's hooves on hard-packed earth. Clara kept her head high, ignoring the stares of townspeople as they rode down Main Street. Word had already spread. The widow who'd bedded the railroad baron. They didn't take her to the jail, but to a room above Crane's mercantile. It was well appointed, almost luxurious, with velvet curtains and a Persian rug. Crane dismissed the others and gestured for her to sit. Tea? I'd rather drink poison. So dramatic. Very well. Let's discuss business. Crane settled behind his desk. Samuel Ashcroft has proven difficult. He's refusing to cooperate with the board's wishes. We thought perhaps you might have some influence. He left me. What influence could I have? Come now. The man was besotted. A word from you, a plea for your safety. Crane spread his hands. He might be more amenable. You want me to convince him to vote your way, in exchange for your freedom and enough money to go anywhere you please. It's a generous offer. Clara studied him, this soft man who dealt in lives like playing cards. And if he still refuses, then we'll have to try other methods. Methods that might be unpleasant for both of you. The threat was clear. They'd hurt her to break Sam. Hurt Sam to punish them both. Clara felt sick but kept her expression neutral. Where is he? That's better. He's being held at the old Fortuna mine, awaiting transport to San Francisco. Crane leaned back, satisfied. You'll write him a letter. Tell him you're in danger. Beg him to cooperate. A woman's tears can move mountains, they say. I won't cry for any man. No? Not even to save his life? Crane's smile was sharp. Because make no mistake, Mrs. Whitmore, if Ashcroft doesn't sign those papers, he'll never reach San Francisco. Mining country is dangerous. Accidents happen. Clara's hands clenched in her lap, but she nodded. Give me paper. She wrote carefully, aware of Crane reading over her shoulder. The words were what he wanted. Pleas for help, declarations of danger, requests for Sam to do whatever they asked. But Clara had learned her letters from her mother, who'd taught her more than simple writing. There was a code in the word choices, in the pattern of sentences. Sam was an engineer. He understood patterns. Touching, Crane said when she finished. This should do nicely. They locked her in the room, posting a guard outside. Clara waited until nightfall, then set to work. The window was nailed shut, but nails could be worked loose. The bed sheets could be knotted. She'd climbed down from her father's hayloft 100 times as a girl, sneaking out for midnight rides. This was no different. The guard was asleep when she slipped past, lost in dreams of whatever men like him dreamed. Clara made her way through empty streets to the livery stable, where she saddled a horse with practiced silence. The Fortuna mine was 15 miles through rough country. She could make it before dawn. The night ride was treacherous, following paths more memory than sight. Twice the horse stumbled, and Clara had to trust its instincts over her own. But she knew this land, had ridden it with Thomas in happier days. Every ridge and ravine was mapped in her bones. She smelled the mine before she saw it, that peculiar mix of dust and dynamite residue that never quite faded. 2 guards lounged at the entrance, passing a bottle between them. Clara tied the horse and crept closer, using every shadow, every bit of cover. 1 guard went to relieve himself. Clara moved, bringing a rock down hard on the remaining man's head. He crumpled without a sound, The second guard returned to find Clara pointing his partner's gun at him. "Where's Ashcroft?" "Lower level, but you won't—" She struck him too, then took his lantern and entered the mine. The familiar closeness pressed in. Thomas had described it so many times. The weight of earth above, the darkness that ate light. Clara pushed down memories and moved deeper. She found Sam chained in a side chamber, his face bruised, shirt torn. He looked up as her light approached, and his eyes widened. "Clara, how—" "Quiet." She examined the chains. Good quality. But the supports they were attached to were old wood, weakened by time and moisture. "Can you stand?" "Clara, you have to leave. If they find you here, then we'd better hurry." She'd brought tools from the guard's belt, working together. They loosened the support beam enough for Sam to slip the chains free. He caught her shoulders. "Why? After what I am, what I did, you think I care about your money or your railroad?" Clara's voice was fierce. "You think any of that matters? They killed my horses, Sam, Cole, and Buttermilk, and they think they can use me to control you, use you to control me. Well, I'm done being used." Sam pulled her against him, his chains clanking. "I'm sorry. For everything. Apologize later. Move now." They made it halfway to the entrance before shouts erupted behind them. More guards, drawn by the commotion. Sam grabbed Clara's hand, pulling her into a side tunnel as gunfire echoed off stone walls. "This way! I remember these tunnels from the surveys." They ran through twisting passages, their single lantern casting wild shadows. Behind them, voices grew closer. Then Sam stopped, pushing Clara against the wall as he studied a junction. "The old powder storage. If we can reach it." A shot rang out, chips of rock exploding near Clara's head. Morrison stood at the tunnel mouth, gun raised. "End of the line. Widow." Sam moved to shield Clara, but she was already raising the guard's pistol. Time slowed. Morrison's finger tightened on the trigger. Clara fired first. The shot was impossibly loud in the confined space. Morrison staggered, looking surprised, then fell. Clara stared at the gun in her hand, at the man on the ground. She'd never killed before, never thought she could. "Clara," Sam's voice brought her back. "We have to go." They ran again, reaching a chamber filled with old mining equipment and crates marked danger. Sam grabbed a handful of dynamite sticks, still viable after all these years. "Remember what I said about the railroad cutting corners?" He lit a fuse with their lantern. "Time to collect on that particular debt." They barely made it out before the explosion. The mine entrance collapsed in a roar of stone and dust, sealing the passages behind them. Anyone following would need days to dig through. Dawn was breaking as they stood in the ruins of the old Fortuna works, both filthy and exhausted. Sam looked at the woman beside him, this fierce, impossible woman who'd come for him despite everything. "Now what?" he asked. Clara wiped dust from her face, considering. "Now we disappear, both of us. Let them think we died in that mine. Your land is dirt and memories. I thought it was all I had left of Thomas, but I was wrong." She met his eyes. "He would have wanted me to live, not just survive. And I can't do that here, fighting their corruption with nothing but stubbornness." Sam took her hand, feeling the calluses and strength there. "Where do we go?" "Anywhere. Everywhere." A smile touched her lips, the first real smile he'd seen since Crane's visit. "You know railways. I know cattle. Surely we can make something of that." "Clara Whitmore, are you proposing we go into business together?" "Among other things." She squeezed his hand. "Partners?" "Partners," Sam agreed, sealing it with a kiss as the sun painted the desert gold behind them. They took the horse and what supplies they could salvage, heading north toward Colorado, toward a future neither could fully imagine, but both were willing to fight for. Behind them, smoke still rose from the collapsed mine, a monument to their particular form of justice. The news of their supposed deaths in the Fortuna mine collapse spread quickly through the territory, but Josiah Crane was too cunning to believe convenient accidents. Within days, he'd posted bounties and sent word through his network of contacts. Find the woman and the railroad baron. Bring them back alive. Clara and Sam had made it as far as Cedar Ridge, a mining camp 40 miles north. When their luck ran out, they'd traded the stolen horse for supplies and were preparing to board a freight wagon heading to Colorado when Clara spotted the men. 4 riders, moving with the purposeful intent of hunters who'd caught their prey's scent. "Sam," she said quietly, not turning from the general store window. "Back door, now!" But it was too late. The riders had split up, 2 circling behind the building. When Sam and Clara emerged into the alley, they found guns pointed at their faces. "Mr. Ashcroft, Mrs. Whitmore." The lead man, a scarred gunslinger named Wade Garrett, touched his hat mockingly. "Mr. Crane sends his regards." They were bound and thrown over saddles like sacks of grain, a humiliation designed to break their spirits. The ride back toward Redemption Creek was brutal, made worse by Garrett's running commentary about what Crane had planned for them. "See, killing you quick would be a waste," Garrett explained conversationally as they rode. "Mr. Crane, he's got a sense of theater. Figures a public example needs to be made." Clara tested her bonds for the 100th time, feeling them bite into her wrists. Beside her, Sam's face was set in stone, but she could see him calculating, measuring distances and odds. Their chance came at dusk when they stopped to water the horses at Coyote Springs. Clara had been feigning weakness, letting herself sag limply across the saddle. When one of the men untied her to let her drink, she collapsed as if fainting. He bent to help her, and she drove her knee up hard, sending him staggering back. Sam moved simultaneously, using his bound hands to grab the nearest man's gun. The clearing erupted in chaos. Clara rolled behind a boulder as shots rang out, her hands still tied but her mind racing. She spotted a jagged piece of shale and began sawing at her bonds. "Clara, down!" Sam's voice cut through the gunfire. She flattened herself as a bullet whined overhead, then heard the thunder of approaching hooves. More riders, drawn by the shooting, but these weren't Crane's men. The newcomers wore badges, and their leader was Marshal John Hawthorne from the county seat. Clara had never been so glad to see a lawman in her life. "Drop your weapons," Hawthorne commanded. "Garrett, that bounty ain't legal and you know it." A tense standoff followed. Garrett snarled but ultimately backed down. Even he wouldn't shoot a federal marshal. As his men were disarmed, Hawthorne approached Sam and Clara. "Ma'am, Mr. Ashcroft, we've been looking for you." Clara's heart sank. Had they escaped one trap only to fall into another? But Hawthorne's next words surprised her. "Got a wire from San Francisco. Seems there's been developments regarding the Transcontinental Railroad Company. The board's under federal investigation for corruption and murder." He studied Sam. "Your testimony would be valuable." "In exchange for what?" Sam asked warily. "Immunity. If you cooperate fully. Protection for you and Mrs. Whitmore." Hawthorne glanced at Clara. "Though, from what I've seen, ma'am, you handle protection pretty well yourself." Over the next hour, as they made camp under guard, the full story emerged. Sam's disappearance had triggered scrutiny from investors when he'd failed to appear for crucial votes. Questions were asked. Documents Sam had hidden before fleeing were discovered by federal investigators. The empire of corruption was beginning to crumble. "Crane's just one tentacle," Hawthorne explained. "This goes all the way to Washington. Men are going to hang for this." "And us?" Clara asked. "You'll need to testify. Both of you. After that," he shrugged. "Free to go wherever you please." That night, as they bedded down under stars and martial guard, Clara lay next to Sam, their hands finding each other in the darkness. "It's not over," she whispered. "No," he agreed. "But it's a start." The next days blurred together. The ride to the county seat, where they gave depositions that ran to dozens of pages. The federal prosecutor, a sharp young man named William Thornton, was particularly interested in Sam's knowledge of the safety violations. "The Bonanza mine alone," Thornton said, studying the documents Sam had sketched from memory. 14 men dead because proper supports would have cost an extra $1,000. 15, Clara corrected quietly. My husband makes 15. Thornton nodded respectfully. 15. Their families deserve justice. But Crane wasn't finished. Even as the legal net tightened, he made one last play. Clara was returning to her hotel room when she found the door ajar. Inside, a man sat in the shadows, not Crane himself, but another gunman, this one with dead eyes and steady hands. Mrs. Whitmore, please, sit. Clara remained standing, calculating distances to the door, the window, the letter opener on the desk. State your business. Mr. Crane wants to make a deal. You and Ashcroft disappear, permanently. In exchange, he'll ensure certain documents never surface, documents that might implicate you in your husband's activities. What activities? Clara's voice was ice. Seems Thomas Whitmore was stealing from the company, selling supplies meant for mine support. The gunman smiled coldly. Course, those accusations would be lies. But mudsticks, especially to a widow. Your husband's memory would be ruined. Clara felt rage build in her chest. Clean and pure as desert lightning. They would dare sully Thomas's name to protect themselves? Tell Crane, she said slowly, that he can take his deal and... The door burst open. Sam entered, took in the scene in an instant, and moved. The gunman went for his weapon, but Sam was already there, the two men crashing into the wall. Clara grabbed the letter opener, but the fight was over quickly. Sam had learned hard lessons in his months of running. As the gunman lay groaning on the floor, Marshal Hawthorne appeared with two deputies. Heard the commotion, he said mildly. This fellow bothering you, ma'am? He was just leaving. Clara said, after delivering a message, tell Crane we'll see him in court. The trial, when it came, was a sensation. The courtroom in Carson City was packed with journalists, speculators, and families of the men who died in Transcontinental's mines. Sam testified for 3 days, detailing the systematic corner-cutting, the bribes, the threats against those who complained. But it was Clara's testimony that made headlines. She spoke simply and directly about Thomas, about their dreams, about the night he'd left for his last shift. When the prosecutor showed her Thomas's personal effects, including the watch she'd given him on their wedding day, still stopped at the moment of the cave-in. Several jurors wiped their eyes. He knew the supports were failing, Clara said. They all did, but the company said work or starve, so they worked, and they died. For profit margins and stock prices. Crane's lawyers tried to discredit her, implying she'd taken up with Sam for money, that her grief was performance. Clara weathered their attacks with quiet dignity, never raising her voice, never backing down. You shared your bed with the man responsible. One lawyer sneered. I shared my life with a man trying to make amends. Clara replied, that's more than your client ever did. The verdict was never really in doubt. Crane and 6 other board members were found guilty of multiple counts of murder through criminal negligence, as they were led away in chains. Crane caught Clara's eye. She expected hatred but saw only bewilderment. He truly didn't understand how a desert widow and a reformed baron had brought down his empire. Outside the courthouse, Sam and Clara stood in the afternoon sun. Reporters shouted questions, but they ignored them. There would be time for that later. For now, there was only this moment, this victory that tasted of justice and sorrow combined. What now? Sam asked. The same question from the mine ruins, but different now. Then they'd been fugitives. Now they were free. Clara considered. The government had seized Crane's assets, including her land, but promised compensation to the victims' families. She would have money, not much, but enough. Sam still had engineering skills the honest railroads would need. They had choices now, possibilities. I've been thinking, she said. There are other widows out there, other families broken by greed. Maybe we could... Yes, Sam interrupted, understanding immediately. Whatever you're thinking, yes. She smiled, the expression transforming her face. You don't even know what I was going to say. Doesn't matter. Your ideas have saved us both more than once. I'd be a fool not to follow where you lead. They walked away from the courthouse together, ignoring the crowds and cameras. Behind them, justice ground on. Slow but inexorable. Ahead lay an uncertain future, but one they would face as partners in every sense. That night, in a hotel room overlooking the Sierra Nevada, they made plans. A foundation for minors' families, safe housing for widows and orphans. Sam's engineering knowledge applied to preventing the disasters that created such need. It wouldn't bring back the dead, but it might save the living. Thomas would approve, Clara said softly, watching the stars appear over the mountains. Sam wrapped his arms around her from behind. He loved you well, to inspire such loyalty, even now. He loved honestly. Clara corrected. That's all anyone can ask. They stood in comfortable silence. Two survivors who'd found each other in the wreckage of their former lives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fights. But tonight, there was peace in the simple act of standing together, of choosing hope over bitterness, love over loss. In the distance, a train whistle echoed through the mountains. Not a sound of sorrow anymore, but of possibility, of tracks laid true and bridges built to last. Of the future they would forge from the ashes of the past. Spring came early to Nevada that year, painting the desert in unexpected colors. Purple lupines and golden poppies carpeted the valleys, as if the earth itself celebrated the changes sweeping through the territory. Sam Ashcroft stood at the edge of the construction site, watching crews lay track for the new Northern Nevada Railway, a line built with proper safety standards, fair wages, and respect for the workers who risked their lives daily. 6 months had passed since the trial. Sam had officially renounced his shares in the corrupt Transcontinental Railroad, directing the proceeds to the families of victims. It had left him with little monetary wealth but something far more valuable, a clean conscience and a purpose that drove him from dawn to dusk. The gradient through Devil's Passes is still too steep, his foreman, Michael O'Brien, said, joining him with updated surveys. We'll need to blast another 50 feet to make it safe. Then we blast, Sam replied without hesitation. Better to spend money on dynamite than lives on dangerous curves. O'Brien grinned. Never thought I'd hear a railroad man say that. You're not working for a railroad man. You're working for an engineer who happens to know rails. Sam rolled up the plans. How are the new dormitories coming along? Ahead of schedule. The men appreciate having decent quarters for once. O'Brien paused. Speaking of which, Mrs. Whitmore's here. Said she needed to speak with you. Sam's heart quickened as it always did at Clara's name. He found her at the makeshift headquarters, dressed in practical riding clothes, studying the maps on his desk. The sight of her still caught him off guard sometimes, the way afternoon light caught the copper in her hair. The determined set of her shoulders that had carried her through so much. Clara. He crossed to her, wanting to embrace her but aware of the workers visible through the windows. They'd been careful about propriety, maintaining separate residences in town while their partnership deepened in ways that had nothing to do with business. Is everything all right at the shelter? More than all right. Her smile was radiant. We received another donation today. Anonymous, but substantial. Enough to build the new wing we discussed. The shelter, Clara's dream made real. A sanctuary for mining widows and their children, offering not just temporary refuge, but education, job training, and hope. In 6 months, they'd help dozens of families find their feet again. That's wonderful, Sam said, though something in her expression suggested there was more. There's something else. Clara pulled an envelope from her jacket. This came for you, from Washington. Sam recognized the official seal and felt his stomach tighten. He'd testified before Congress twice already, helping craft legislation for mining safety standards. Each trip east had been a reminder of the world he'd left behind, the power plays and politics that seemed so hollow now. He opened the letter, scanning quickly. They want me to head a new federal commission on railroad safety. Full-time position, based in Washington. Clara's face carefully neutral. That's a great honor, the chance to make real change at the highest levels. Clara, You should accept. She turned to the window, her back straight. It's what you've been working toward. National standards would save thousands of lives. Sam set the letter aside and moved to stand behind her, close but not touching. And leave Nevada, leave the shelter, leave you? We always knew this was temporary. Her voice was steady, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. Two broken people finding shelter in each other while we healed. But you're healed now. Sam, you have a chance to be who you were meant to be. Who I was meant to be? Sam laughed, short and bitter. I was meant to be another corrupt railroad baron until a storm brought me to your door. Everything good in me now, everything worthwhile, exists because of that night, because of you. Clara turned then, and he saw tears she was fighting not to shed. Don't you understand? I can't be the reason you don't take this position. I won't be the chain that holds you back from doing the greatest good. Chain? Sam caught her hands. Clara Whitmore, you are the opposite of a chain. You're the key that unlocked everything I'd buried under years of compromise and greed. Pretty words, she whispered. But what happens in a year, 5 years, when you realize you gave up changing the world for a widow in a half-built shelter in a desert town? Then I'll thank God for my good sense. Sam's voice was fierce. The world has plenty of bureaucrats and commissioners. What it needs more of is people like us, working in the places others forget, making real difference one life at a time. Clara searched his face. You're certain? I've never been more certain of anything. Sam released her hands only to cup her face gently. But even if I weren't, there's another reason I could never leave. What reason? Instead of answering, Sam went to his desk and pulled out a small box he'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. He dropped to one knee. There in the dusty office with survey maps and construction schedules scattered around them. Clara Whitmore, you saved my life in more ways than one. You showed me that redemption isn't about grand gestures, but daily choices. You've been my partner in business, in purpose, in everything but name. He opened the box, revealing not a diamond, but something far more meaningful. A ring made from a railroad spike, polished and shaped into a band. Will you be my partner in all things? Will you marry me? Clara stared at the ring, understanding its significance. The very metal that had built fortunes on suffering, transformed into a symbol of their shared commitment to something better. Sam. She knelt too, meeting him at eye level. Are you proposing with a railroad spike? Too much? He started to close the box, but she caught his hand. It's perfect. She was crying now, not bothering to hide it. Absolutely perfect. Yes, yes to all of it. To partnership and purpose and whatever storms come next. He slipped the unusual ring onto her finger, where it caught the light like a promise. They kissed there on the office floor, surrounded by the detritus of empire building turned to better purpose, while outside the construction crews continued their work, building something meant to last. When they finally stood, brushing dust from their knees and grinning like youngsters, Clara asked, "What will you tell Washington?" Sam took the official letter and, without ceremony, tore it in half. I'll tell them I'm otherwise engaged. Literally. He pulled her close. Besides, I have a better idea. What if we take everything we've learned here and help other communities do the same? Travel the rail lines, help establish shelters and safety standards from the ground up. Clara's eyes lit with possibilities. A moving foundation? Teaching and building as we go? Why not? We're already partners in everything else. Sam gestured to the maps. The northern Nevada line will be complete in 2 months. O'Brien can manage operations. We could start with Colorado, then Wyoming. Wherever the need is greatest. Thomas always wanted to see the Rockies, Clara said softly. He used to talk about the mountains touching the sky. Then we'll see them for him. For all of them. Sam pressed a kiss to her forehead. We'll carry their dreams with us. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning, their conversation ranging from practical logistics to wild dreams. By sunset, they'd sketched out a future neither could have imagined in those first desperate days, a life of purpose and partnership. building something that mattered in the forgotten corners of the American West. As they prepared to leave the office, Clara paused at the door. "Do you remember that first night, when you asked for shelter?" "Every detail," Sam replied. "I almost turned you away, almost let fear win." She twisted the railroad spike ring on her finger. "Best mistake I never made." "Agreed." Sam offered her his arm. "Shall we go tell the others? I imagine the shelter ladies will have opinions about wedding planning." Clara laughed, the sound bright as desert stars. "Oh, they've been planning our wedding since the week you arrived. Mrs. Patterson has a whole notebook of ideas." They walked out together into the spring evening, where wildflowers bloomed impossible and bright against the harsh landscape. Behind them, the railway stretched toward the horizon. Steel tracks laid true and straight. Ahead waited a lifetime of such building, not just of rails and shelters, but of hope in places where hope had been in short supply. In the distance, a meadowlark sang its evening song, clear and sweet across the desert. Clara squeezed Sam's arm, feeling the solid presence of him, the shared purpose that bound them stronger than any vow. They'd found each other in loss and violence, but they'd chosen each other in healing and hope. It was, she thought, exactly the kind of love story the West needed. Not conquest, but partnership. Not taking, but building. Not the romance of outlaws and violence, but the deeper romance of two people choosing to make something good from the ashes of the past. "Where shall we marry?" Sam asked as they walked. "The church in town? The courthouse?" Clara smiled, her mind already made up. "There's a spot I know, where the old survey route crosses Sage Creek, where the wildflowers bloom thickest and you can see for miles in every direction. Outside, the proper citizens will be scandalized. Let them. We're not proper citizens. Sam, we're survivors. We're builders. We're us." She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. "I want to marry you under the open sky, with the mountains as witness and the desert wind as blessing. I want to start our new life the way we mean to continue. Honestly. Simply. Together." Sam lifted their joined hands to his lips, kissing her knuckles just above the railroad spike ring. "Then that's what we'll do. You and me in the wide sky and whatever future we can build with our own hands." They resumed walking, their shadows long across the dusty street, their hearts full of plans and promises. Behind them, the sun set in glory over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose and hope. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and brilliant, with a kind of crystalline light that only comes to the high desert in early summer. Clara stood at the window of the shelter, watching the sun paint the mountains gold, while behind her, a flutter of activity filled the room. "Hold still, child." "Mrs." Patterson commanded, adjusting the simple white dress they'd sewn together from fabric donated by a merchant's widow. "You're jumpier than a Mustang in a thunderstorm." "I'm not jumpy," Clara protested, though her hands betrayed her, trembling slightly as she smoothed the skirt. "Course you are," laughed Mary Sullivan, one of the younger widows. "You're marrying Samuel Ashcroft. Half the women in 3 states would be jumpy." "I'm not marrying Samuel Ashcroft, railroad baron," Clara corrected gently. "I'm marrying Sam, the man who mended my fences and fixed my pump and held me while I cried for everything I'd lost." The room quieted at that, the women exchanging glances of understanding. They all knew about loss, about the difference between the men the world saw and the men who held you in the dark. Across town, Sam faced his own preparations in the room above O'Brien's office. The foreman acted as impromptu valet, helping Sam into his best suit, not the expensive tailoring of his former life, but clean and well-fitted, bought from the local tailor with money earned honestly. "Nervous?" O'Brien asked, handing him a flask. Sam considered, then shook his head. "No, for the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I should be, about to do exactly what I should do." "Good man." O'Brien clapped him on the shoulder. "Though if you hurt that woman, you'll have every miner in Nevada to answer to. She's done more for our families than all the politicians combined." I know. Sam adjusted his string tie, meeting his own eyes in the mirror. The man looking back bore little resemblance to the desperate fugitive who'd collapsed in Clara's stable. This man had calluses from honest work, lines around his eyes from desert sun rather than boardroom stress, and a peace in his expression that no amount of money had ever brought. I plan to spend my life earning the gift she's giving me today. The wedding party gathered at noon at Sage Creek, where the old survey route crossed the water. It was a simple affair by society standards. No cathedral, no orchestra, no crowds of dignitaries. Instead, there were the shelter families, the railroad workers, Marshall Hawthorne and his wife, and Reverend Davies from the small church Clara had attended sporadically. But what it lacked in grandeur, it made up for in meaning. Wildflowers carpeted the ground in purple and gold. The creek sang over stones worn smooth by time. Eagles circled high above, and the mountains stood as silent witnesses to promises made under their shadow. Clara arrived on horseback, having insisted on riding to her own wedding. She wore Thomas's mother's small gold cross at her throat and carried a bouquet of desert wildflowers. When she dismounted and walked towards Sam, waiting by the creek with the Reverend, several of the tougher miners had to clear their throats and look away. Sam watched her approach with wonder written across his face. Here was the woman who'd saved him with suspicious eyes and a loaded shotgun, who'd fought beside him against corruption and greed, who'd shown him that redemption wasn't a destination but a daily journey. When she reached him and placed her hand in his, he felt the circle close, past and future meeting in this perfect present. Dearly beloved, Reverend Davies began, his voice carrying across the water. We gather in God's great cathedral of creation to witness the joining of two souls who found each other in the wilderness. The ceremony was simple, the vows traditional with personal additions. When it came time for Sam to speak his promises, he looked directly into Clara's eyes. Clara, you gave me shelter when I deserved none, trust when I'd earned only suspicion, and love when I'd forgotten what it meant. I promised to spend every day proving worthy of those gifts. I promised to build with you, dream with you, and stand with you against whatever storms may come. I promised to remember that our love was forged in difficulty and tempered by truth, and to never take for granted the miracle of your choosing me. Clara's voice was strong and clear as she made her own vows. Sam, you entered my life like a desert storm, dangerous and transformative. You showed me that hearts could heal, that second chances were possible, that love could grow even in the harshest ground. I promise to be your partner in all things, your conscience when needed, your comfort always. I promise to remember that our love is not separate from our work, but part of it, and that together we can build something that matters. When Reverend Davies pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up could probably be heard in the next county. Sam kissed his bride while miners threw their hats in the air and the shelter children scattered flower petals with enthusiastic abandon. The celebration that followed was a testament to community born of shared struggle. Tables made of sawhorses and planks groaned under the weight of food contributed by dozens of families. O'Brien had somehow procured a fiddle player, and soon couples were dancing on the grass, their laughter mixing with the creek's constant song. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Sam found Clara standing apart from the celebration, looking out across the valley. "Regrets?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "Never." She leaned back against him. "I was just thinking about Thomas, how he would have liked you, how he would have understood what we're trying to build. From what you've told me of him, I think you're right." Sam pressed a kiss to her temple. "We'll honor him, Clara, and all the others, every safe mine, every widow helped, every child educated. It's all part of keeping their memory alive." She turned in his arms, the railroad spike ring catching the light. "Do you remember what you said that night in the rain? That there was only that moment. I remember everything about that night. You were wrong." She smiled, soft and sure. "There's this moment, and tomorrow's moment, and all the moments stretching ahead. We get to have them all," as if to underscore her words. O'Brien appeared with news. "Hate to interrupt the newlyweds, but we just got word the Colorado Territory is interested in our safety program. They want you both to come survey their operations, help establish standards." Clara and Sam exchanged glances, a whole conversation in a look. "When?" Sam asked. "They'd like you there by month's end. Gives you a few weeks to—" O'Brien grinned. "Settle into married life." After he left, Clara laughed, the sound bright as water over stones. 3 weeks of honeymoon before we're back to work. Think that's enough? With you?" Sam spun her in a circle, making her skirts fly. "A lifetime won't be enough, but it's a good start." As the celebration continued around them, they stood together in the gathering dusk, watching the stars emerge one by one above the mountains. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fights for justice and safety and dignity for the forgotten. They would travel the rail lines, building shelters and hope in equal measure. They would face setbacks and victories, sorrow and joy. But tonight, there was only this: two people who'd found each other in loss and chosen each other in hope, standing together under the vast western sky. The desert wind rose, carrying with it the scent of sage and possibility, and Clara pressed closer to her husband, feeling the solid truth of him, the shared purpose that would carry them forward. In the distance, a train whistle sounded, not mournful but triumphant, heralding journeys yet to come. Sam and Clara turned together toward the sound, hands clasped, faces bright with anticipation. They had work to do, lives to change, a legacy to build, but they would do it together, and that made all the difference. As the stars wheeled overhead and the wedding guests danced on the grass, Clara Whitmore Ashcroft and Samuel Ashcroft stood at the beginning of their greatest adventure, not the taming of the West, but the transformation of it. One act of justice and compassion at a time. The desert had brought them together, tested them, and made them strong. Now it released them to carry that strength wherever it was needed. Two hearts beating as one, building something that would outlast them both. The West had always been about new beginnings. Theirs was just beginning, and it would be magnificent. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. If you enjoyed Clara and Sam's journey from heartbreak to hope, please let us know where you're listening from in the comments below. We'd love to connect with fellow Western romance enthusiasts from around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier tales. And share your thoughts on this story of redemption and second chances in the unforgiving Nevada desert. Until our next adventure, partners.